The room remained suspended in anticipation, the soft clink of silverware now an echo against the hushed tension. Simone Davis moved with deliberate calm, sliding the chair back slightly before lowering herself to take a seat opposite Julian Harper. Her presence was measured, eyes scanning the polished table, noting the delicate pattern of crystal glasses, the subtle reflections of amber candlelight across the walnut surface. Guests whispered quietly to one another, adjusting their positions in their seats, as if trying to understand the audacity that had just unfolded. Simone did not speak immediately. She allowed the silence to stretch, letting the weight of her request settle into every corner of the room. Her mind traced the countless nights she had spent observing rooms like this, decoding gestures, intonation, the unspoken hierarchy that floated just beneath the surface. Every CEO, every investor, every powerful executive she had served had thought her invisible, and yet, tonight, she was far from it. Julian's eyes did not waver from hers, the intensity of his gaze a mixture of curiosity, irritation, and the first trace of uncertainty he had ever allowed himself to feel in such a controlled environment. He shifted slightly in his chair, the tailored lines of his suit catching the soft glow of the chandelier, the subtle scent of his cologne mingling with the rich aroma of the dinner setting. Simone allowed herself a small, deliberate intake of breath, the kind that signaled confidence without arrogance, poise without aggression. The fine details of her appearance were understated. The pressed apron over a simple black blouse, hair tied neatly behind her head, shoes spotless, but every movement communicated an inner strength cultivated from years of navigating spaces where she was expected to be unnoticed. Guests began to realize that her quiet confidence was a language in itself, one that conveyed competence, awareness, and a challenge to the assumptions they carried into the room. The ambient music, a soft string quartet, seemed to fade into the background as the unspoken dialogue between Simone and Julian took center stage. She leaned slightly forward, not to intrude, but to engage, to claim the space that had been subtly denied to her over countless evenings of service. Julian shifted again, a subtle furrow in his brow betraying the internal calculation as he weighed this unexpected assertion of presence. Simone's mind traced the trajectory of the evening, the careful choreography required to maintain dignity while navigating the delicate balance of service, observation, and assertion. She recalled the lessons from her grandmother, the discipline instilled through athletic training, the quiet pride in academic achievements, all converging in this singular moment where visibility and agency intersected. Every subtle movement, every controlled breath was a testament to resilience, a demonstration that presence alone could challenge assumptions and unsettle perceived authority. As the waiter quietly refilled glasses nearby, the clinking cut through the tension but did not break it. Rather, it underscored the contrast between routine and the extraordinary act of quiet audacity taking place at the table. Julian Harper's hands flexed lightly on the table, a micro-expression signaling recognition of the defiance, of the poise that refused to bow. Simone did not flinch, did not yield, and in her calm, measured gaze, she offered the first tangible evidence that the dynamics of power in the room could be shifted, that respect and recognition could be demanded through dignity alone. Around them, the atmosphere thickened, every onlooker sensing the subtle but irreversible realignment of energy, the quiet assertion of human worth that did not rely on status, wealth, or reputation. Simone's inner voice acknowledged the significance of the moment. She was fully aware that each second counted, that the room's collective perception was shifting, recalibrating to accommodate the audacity, the presence, the intelligence of someone long overlooked. Julian Harper, for the first time in his curated life of controlled encounters, confronted the unexpected, someone meeting his scrutiny not with submission, but with equal measure of composure, confidence, and undeniable presence. In the stillness that followed, the room seemed to exhale. Collectively, recognizing that the narrative had shifted subtly but irreversibly. Simone Davis did not need to raise her voice, make demands, or assert superiority. Her very presence had begun to rewrite the unspoken rules, commanding attention, respect, and curiosity from everyone present, marking the first chapter of a reversal that would unfold slowly, yet inevitably over the course of the evening. Simone Davis reached across the table with the grace of someone accustomed to both observation and action, her hand brushing the edge of Julian Harper's plate, steady and intentional. The subtle movement drew a collective intake of breath from the surrounding diners, as if the air itself was aware of the shift in the room's dynamics. Julian's eyes, usually sharp and calculating, flickered with something new, an uncertainty that had never penetrated his carefully constructed confidence. Simone's posture remained poised, her shoulders back, chin slightly lifted, and eyes locking with his, not as a servant pleading for attention, but as an equal challenging a long-held assumption. Around them, the room's ambient sounds had muted, the soft clink of cutlery, the whisper of chairs against the polished hardwood, and the low hum of conversation all fading into a tension-filled quiet. Every detail of the lounge, from the gold inlay on the table edges to the intricate pattern of the Persian rug beneath, became part of the tableau framing this subtle confrontation. Simone's gaze flicked to the other guests, noting the wide eyes, the subtle shifts in posture, and the tentative half-smiles of acknowledgement. She could feel the invisible currents of power flowing around Julian, the expectation of compliance and deference, and yet she moved deliberately, each gesture a quiet assertion of dignity and presence. She recalled the countless nights spent balancing trays while observing the subtle hierarchies of power, the micro-expressions that revealed more than words ever could, the delicate art of maintaining visibility without inciting confrontation. In that instant, every lesson crystallized into action. She reached for the menu placed before Julian, her fingers brushing against the fine paper, and offered a suggestion in a calm, clear voice, noting the elegance of phrasing that carried confidence without challenge. Julian's lips parted slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing his features, his composure momentarily interrupted as he registered her initiative, the intelligence and tact behind the suggestion. Guests shifted, leaning in almost imperceptibly, sensing the nuance, recognizing that this was no ordinary interaction, that a black waitress had asserted influence in a space traditionally dominated by wealth and status. The soft lighting accentuated her calm determination, casting a subtle glow across her features, eyes bright with focus, hands steady despite the intensity surrounding her. Julian's posture, once rigid with authority, now mirrored the cautious respect of someone negotiating unfamiliar terrain, his every movement measured as he processed the implications of her intervention. Simone allowed herself a controlled exhale, feeling the weight of observation, of judgment, and of acknowledgement from both Julian and the room. She knew that every calculated word, every carefully considered movement, would be remembered, that the power of presence often outweighed the overt display of wealth. The hum of conversation slowly resumed, tentative at first, each guest recalibrating their perception of the room, their understanding of hierarchy subtly reshaped. Simone's eyes never left Julian's, holding a quiet challenge and a promise that the evening was far from predictable, that the dynamics set at the first question had only begun to unfold. She guided the conversation, suggesting the next dish, mentioning a wine pairing, each phrase layered with subtle authority and insight, the precision of speech demonstrating awareness and expertise that transcended her role as a server. Julian, absorbing each word, found his habitual confidence tempered by curiosity and a recognition that the woman before him commanded respect without raising her voice. The room, sensing the shift, began to observe with new awareness, noting how dignity and intelligence could quietly but decisively influence even the most entrenched positions of power. Simone's presence, her strategic grace, and her measured interactions had created a new equilibrium in the lounge, a subtle but undeniable recalibration of authority, one that invited acknowledgement without confrontation and respect without submission. Every gesture, every look, and every carefully chosen word was a demonstration of control achieved not through wealth or status, but through quiet competence, empathy, and unwavering poise. Guests and staff alike sensed the transformation, an understanding that the narrative had changed and that the course of the evening would now unfold under this newly established dynamic. As Simone's calm, measured, and intelligent engagement began to redefine what presence and influence truly meant within the elegant confines of the Veritas Lounge. As the conversation between Simone Davis and Julian Harper continued across the polished mahogany table, the subtle dynamics of power unfolded like a carefully orchestrated dance, each movement weighted with unspoken significance. Simone maintained a calm, deliberate composure, her fingers lightly resting near the edge of her water glass, the soft amber reflection of the candlelight catching the curve of her wrist. Julian, whose usual confidence radiated like a shield, now hesitated slightly with each gesture, registering the quiet authority that Simone projected without raising her voice or demanding attention. Around them, the Veritas lounge seemed to hold its collective breath, the low murmur of conversation subdued to an almost imperceptible whisper as diners sensed the nuanced tension. Simone observed the guests as carefully as she had observed Julian, noting the subtle shifts in posture, the barely perceptible widening of eyes, the tiny adjustments of hands and laps, all indicators that the balance in the room had subtly begun to shift. Her mind traced the hours she had spent mastering the art of observation, the lessons gleaned from her grandmother about dignity, patience, and the power of being seen, fully integrating those lessons into her present actions. She guided the discussion toward the wine selections with a measured tone, suggesting pairings that displayed knowledge and taste, without condescension, demonstrating competence and insight that Julian could not ignore. His gaze, sharp and calculating, flickered with an unexpected recognition, the first hint that he was reassessing the situation, reconsidering assumptions about both her role and her presence. The faint notes of a string quartet, usually background, now underscored the unfolding drama, highlighting the delicate interplay of respect, perception, and quiet authority. Simone's posture never wavered. Her back remained straight, her shoulders relaxed, and her eyes met Julian's directly, signaling confidence without arrogance, assertion without confrontation. Each sentence she spoke was carefully measured, each suggestion layered with subtle intelligence and the precision that comes from years of observation, allowing her to navigate the room's social architecture with elegance. The air between them was charged with anticipation, not of conflict, but of recognition, of the acknowledgement of capability where it had long been overlooked. Julian shifted in his seat, a minor adjustment that reflected a recalibration of authority, his usual unshakable composure tempered by the realization that the woman before him commanded influence without needing to assert dominance. Guests leaned in slightly, drawn by the subtle but unmistakable shift, noting that the dynamics they had assumed as fixed were now in motion, influenced by presence, poise, and quiet expertise rather than wealth or title. Simone's awareness of every detail, from the gleam of crystal to the texture of the polished wood under her fingertips, allowed her to orchestrate the conversation and movement around the table with an unspoken command, demonstrating that true influence is measured by presence and perception rather than assertion. Julian's responses, careful and deliberate, began to reflect a new understanding of engagement, as he processed the implications of her insight, poise, and understated authority, realizing that the conventional markers of power had shifted in a single, quiet moment. The subtlety of her actions, combined with the depth of her preparation and the grace with which she navigated the room, created an atmosphere where authority was no longer assumed but earned, and recognition was no longer given automatically, but acknowledged through respect and consideration. Simone Davis had demonstrated, through controlled, intelligent, and poised interaction, that influence and presence could recalibrate even the most entrenched hierarchies, leaving an indelible impression on Julian, the guests, and the entire ambience of the Veritas lounge, setting the stage for the unfolding events of the evening, where perception, respect, and quiet mastery of the environment would continue to shape the narrative in ways that were both subtle and profound. Simone Davis noticed a subtle shift in the room as Julian Harper hesitated, a micro-expression revealing the first hint of genuine curiosity and cautious respect. She used the pause, letting her presence speak louder than words, observing the way the chandelier light danced across the polished glassware and reflected softly in the folds of the deep burgundy drapes that framed the floor-to-ceiling windows. The ambient hum of quiet conversation resumed gradually, but every voice now carried a layer of awareness, a recognition that something remarkable was occurring at the small round table. Simone adjusted the angle of a water glass with precise care. The faint sound of crystal meeting would punctuating the moment without breaking the intensity of focus. Her eyes scanned Julian, taking in the way he measured each response, the careful adjustments of his posture, the fleeting furrow of his brow as he processed the implications of her composed assertion. The surrounding diners, many accustomed to unquestioned displays of wealth and authority, began to lean forward subtly, curiosity replacing casual indifference. Simone's thoughts traced the path of her upbringing, the discipline honed through athletic training, the lessons in observation and patience taught by her grandmother, the countless hours learning to navigate spaces where visibility was limited and respect not freely given. Each lesson converged seamlessly in her posture, her gestures, the calm tone of her voice as she suggested the next wine pairing, articulating the subtleties of flavor and origin in a way that invited dialogue rather than demanded attention. Julian Harper, absorbing each carefully delivered suggestion, found his habitual certainty challenged by a combination of insight and presence he had not encountered before. The room itself seemed to recognize the transformation, the soft lighting accentuating the delicate curves of the table and casting subtle shadows that mirrored the tension and anticipation woven through the air. Simone's careful attention to the environment, from the precise arrangement of silverware to the unspoken cues in the guest's body language, allowed her to maintain a controlled but compelling influence over the evolving dynamic. Her calm authority was rooted in preparation and experience, yet it manifested as a quiet force that redirected focus and realigned perceptions without overt confrontation. Julian's eyes, previously cool and assessing, now revealed the first signs of reconsideration, a subtle acknowledgement that the power he assumed to wield was being reframed through presence, insight, and quiet confidence. Guests shifted imperceptibly in their seats, the nuances of posture and expression indicating an awareness that the evening's hierarchy was no longer dictated solely by status or wealth, but by attention, intelligence, and the dignified assertion of agency. Simone maintained her gaze, allowing the tension to ebb and flow with each measured comment, each deliberate gesture, demonstrating that influence could be exercised without dominance, and that respect was earned through poise, knowledge, and composure rather than assumption or intimidation. The soft strains of a string quartet, previously background, now underscored the subtle drama unfolding, highlighting the skill with which Simone navigated the room and interacted with Julian, blending courtesy with command, observation with action, insight with restraint. The air was charged with anticipation as she subtly guided the conversation, selecting topics and phrasing her contributions to highlight expertise and thoughtfulness, ensuring that every interaction reinforced the presence she had established and gently undermined assumptions of hierarchy rooted in wealth alone. Julian, increasingly attentive, responded with careful deliberation, acknowledging the substance and precision in her guidance, a shift in engagement that subtly altered the atmosphere and the perceived balance of authority in the room. The surrounding guests, sensing the recalibration, followed the cues, their attentiveness reflecting the invisible yet undeniable shift in dynamics. Recognizing the power of observation, tact, and presence to command attention and reshape perception without overt assertion. Simone Davis, seated with composure and clarity of purpose, had established a profound yet understated influence, demonstrating the capacity for quiet intelligence and dignity to redefine the contours of authority within the opulent environment of the Veritas Lounge, setting the stage for the continuing interplay of respect, recognition, and subtle social reversal that would define the evening. The subtle shift in energy at the table continued to unfold as Simone Davis guided the conversation with a poised certainty that drew the attention of every guest in the Veritas Lounge. Julian Harper's initial shock had given way to measured curiosity, the corners of his mouth hinting at the first acknowledgement that the woman across from him was not simply a server, but a presence commanding consideration. Simone's gestures were deliberate yet understated, the slight tilt of her hand toward a wine bottle, the careful motion of adjusting a plate, each movement reinforcing the calm authority she carried without ever raising her voice. Guests whispered among themselves in quiet fascination, noting the improbable reversal of perceived hierarchy, the elegance with which she navigated an environment historically dominated by wealth and reputation. Simone's mind traced the patterns she had studied, the countless evenings observing executives like Julian, noting how they measured influence, how they assessed competence, and how they reacted to unexpected assertions of dignity. She spoke now with precision, commenting on the origins of the wines, their subtle flavor profiles, and suggesting pairings that demonstrated both knowledge and a graceful confidence, allowing Julian to respond with engagement rather than command. The tension in the room was tangible yet refined, like the charged air before a lightning storm, the soft candlelight catching the subtle expressions of curiosity, surprise, and tentative respect on the faces of those present. Simone's calm demeanor, coupled with the depth of her insight and the quiet authority in her tone, created a shift that was both immediate and lasting, altering the dynamics not through confrontation, but through presence, competence, and unspoken command. Julian Harper, who had built his empire on control and the assumption of dominance, found himself reconsidering the rules of engagement, recognizing that intelligence and poise could command influence in ways his usual strategies of assertiveness could not. Around the table, every detail reinforced the change. The reflection of light on polished glassware, the soft ripple of conversation, the subtle adjustments in posture by observers, all signaling a recalibration of perception and power. Simone maintained eye contact, steady and unwavering, guiding the dialogue with nuanced interjections that showcased her awareness of the room, the personalities involved, and the subtle currents of expectation and judgment. Julian's responses, deliberate and cautious, reflected a growing recognition of her capability, his habitual composure tempered by the realization that the authority in the room was no longer dictated solely by title or wealth, but by presence, insight, and quiet confidence. The room, attuned to the interplay, seemed to acknowledge the subtle transformation, the invisible shift in the hierarchy that had begun with a simple act of courage and assertive engagement. Simone Davis, through measured conversation, careful observation, and graceful poise, had established a new equilibrium, demonstrating that influence could be achieved without overt assertion, that respect could be commanded without confrontation, and that the dynamics of power were not immutable, but could be gently and profoundly altered by presence, intelligence, and unwavering dignity. Guests and staff alike were quietly recalibrating their perceptions, absorbing the lesson in humility and acknowledgement unfolding at the Veritas Lounge, aware that the evening's narrative had shifted in a manner that would resonate long after the last candle flickered. As Simone's composed authority continued to shape the interactions and the subtle currents of respect and recognition in ways both profound and enduring. The moment stretched, elongated by the soft glow of amber candlelight reflecting across crystal glassware, the polished mahogany of the Veritas Lounge, and the silent attention of every guest seated around the table. Simone Davis maintained her composed posture, shoulders back, hands resting lightly near the edge of her tray, her gaze steady as Julian Harper absorbed the subtle impact of her presence and her insights. The room itself seemed to lean into the tension, the faint hum of the string quartet punctuating the delicate dance of perception, influence, and authority that had begun earlier in the evening. Julian's usual decisiveness was tempered by an unfamiliar awareness. He measured each word, each gesture, and every subtle shift in Simone's expression as if he were learning the rules of a language he had never been fluent in before. Guests shifted quietly in their seats, some leaning forward to catch the nuance of each exchange, their eyes betraying fascination and growing respect for the young woman who had quietly recalibrated the hierarchy without ever raising her voice. Simone's mind traced the trajectory of the night so far, the careful observation of Julian's behaviors, the subtle cues from surrounding guests, and the precise timing of her interventions that combined experience, intelligence, and emotional acuity into one seamless demonstration of competence. She suggested the next course with a calm, confident tone, describing flavors, origins, and pairings in a manner that was both inviting and commanding, ensuring that Julian had to engage thoughtfully rather than respond automatically. His lips pressed into a thin line, a micro-expression of acknowledgement passing fleetingly across his face, signaling recognition of her subtle command and the wisdom embedded in her measured words. The room's atmosphere was charged yet refined. Every sound, from the quiet clinking of silverware to the subdued murmur of diners, emphasizing the contrast between ordinary service and the extraordinary assertion of presence that Simone embodied. Each interaction she orchestrated was deliberate, calibrated to demonstrate that influence and authority could emerge from poise, intelligence, and dignity, rather than wealth or title alone. Julian adjusted slightly in his chair, a conscious recognition of the subtle authority Simone held, his gestures careful as he processed the layers of her influence and the shift in perception among the assembled guests. The soft chandelier lighting highlighted her calm composure and unwavering focus, reinforcing the impression that the dynamics in the room had irrevocably changed. Around them, the guests were quietly recalibrating their understanding of power and respect, observing how Simone navigated the space with precision, grace, and insight, subtly commanding attention without dominance. Every decision, every word, every movement served as a demonstration of quiet mastery, reshaping assumptions and establishing an equilibrium where respect and acknowledgement were earned through presence, competence, and integrity. Simone's actions were measured yet impactful, demonstrating that influence need not be loud to be profound, and that true authority could be exercised through observation, intelligence, and a deep awareness of context. Julian Harper, absorbing these cues, began to approach the interaction differently, responding with measured engagement, allowing a subtle respect to emerge where once only expectation and dominance had resided. The surrounding room seemed to recognize the change, the previously assumed hierarchy recalibrated, as every guest witnessed how presence, dignity, and thoughtful insight could alter perception, command attention, and subtly but decisively reshape power. Simone Davis, seated with unwavering composure, had established a new paradigm, a quiet but undeniable authority that would continue to influence the flow of the evening, leaving a lasting impression on Julian, the guests, and the very ambience of the Veritas Lounge, proving that quiet competence and steadfast poise could redefine the contours of respect, influence, and recognition in the most elite of settings. As the evening deepened, Simone Davis continued to guide the flow of conversation and attention at the table, her movements precise, controlled, and deliberate, each gesture reinforcing the presence she had cultivated since arriving at the Veritas Lounge. Julian Harper, previously accustomed to unquestioned compliance, now observed her with a mixture of admiration and introspection, noting the subtle intelligence embedded in every phrase, every careful motion, and every measured glance. The ambient lighting, soft and warm, highlighted the polished surfaces of the table, the crystal flutes, and the gleam of gold accents, yet it could not outshine the quiet command Simone projected through her posture and poise. Guests around them leaned slightly forward, their expressions betraying fascination and a growing acknowledgement of the shift in dynamics, an awareness that the traditional markers of authority were being redefined by dignity, competence, and presence rather than by title or wealth. Simone's eyes scanned the room with calm precision, registering the reactions of the diners, the subtle nods of recognition, the tentative smiles, and the soft murmurs that signaled both surprise and respect. She allowed pauses to linger, using silence as a tool to magnify attention and underscore her presence, each moment calculated to reinforce the perception of authority without confrontation. Julian's composure, usually unshakable, showed traces of adjustment as he considered the implications of her engagement, the insight behind her words, and the influence of her confident, graceful conduct. Simone suggested the next course and its wine pairing with a quiet elegance, articulating subtle nuances and reasoning with a clarity that commanded attention and invited engagement, ensuring that Julian and the guests could not dismiss her knowledge or her presence. The faint hum of conversation, the gentle clink of silverware, and the understated movements of staff all served as a backdrop to the unfolding psychological interplay, emphasizing the stark contrast between traditional displays of dominance and the understated, effective assertion of intelligence and poise. Simone's training and observation, her years of understanding power dynamics in elite environments, and her careful attention to timing and nuance allowed her to navigate the space with remarkable control, influencing perception without overtly challenging authority, demonstrating the potency of presence, strategy, and composure. Julian Harper's posture subtly shifted with each interaction, his responses tempered by thoughtfulness rather than command, reflecting an emerging respect that had not existed when the evening began. Every interaction, every carefully measured phrase, reinforced the recalibration of attention and authority, signaling to the surrounding guests that true influence could be exercised through intelligence, awareness, and unwavering dignity. Simone maintained eye contact, balanced grace with command, and projected competence with every subtle motion, the quiet power she wielded reshaping expectations and perceptions in real time. Guests, staff, and Julian alike were acutely aware of the transformation, the invisible hierarchy bending in response to her presence, her knowledge, and her unwavering poise, creating an atmosphere where respect and acknowledgement were earned through subtle mastery rather than assumed through status. The interplay of observation, interaction, and insight had established a new rhythm in the room, a silent but powerful recalibration that would guide the remainder of the evening, as Simone Davis's quiet, precise, and authoritative presence continued to command attention and respect within the refined, candlelit elegance of the Veritas Lounge. As the evening drew to a close, the atmosphere in the Veritas Lounge had transformed completely, the soft golden glow of chandeliers reflecting on polished mahogany and crystal glassware now highlighting not just opulence, but the subtle power dynamics that had shifted irrevocably throughout the night. Simone Davis remained seated with quiet composure, her hands resting lightly on the edge of the table, her posture straight, her gaze calm yet assertive, a living testament to presence and dignity. Julian Harper leaned back in his chair, his usual commanding aura softened by introspection and acknowledgement, the corners of his mouth betraying the faintest trace of admiration for the intelligence and poise displayed by the young woman who had subtly yet decisively recalibrated the room. The guests, previously preoccupied with status, wealth, and superficial markers of influence, now observed the subtleties of engagement, noting how respect, attention, and consideration had been earned through measured presence and thoughtful action rather than asserted through dominance. Simone's mind reflected briefly on the journey of the evening. Every pause, every word, every gesture had been executed with purpose, each calibrated to demonstrate that influence could exist without confrontation, that authority could be established through dignity, competence, and observation alone. Julian, once accustomed to unquestioned deference, now engaged with careful attention, responding thoughtfully, as if discovering a new language of interaction where recognition and respect were granted not by hierarchy, but by the merit of presence and intelligence. Around them, the room carried a collective sense of revelation. Staff members and diners alike adjusted their awareness, recalibrating assumptions and expectations as the subtle dynamics Simone had established unfolded in real time. Each movement, whether a deliberate nod, a quiet glance, or the soft placing of a glass on the table, reinforced the notion that true command could be exercised without overt assertion, that dignity and intelligence could quietly yet powerfully reshape perception and influence. The soft strains of music, once background ambience, now underscored the nuanced transformation of the evening, highlighting the interplay between composure, observation, and engagement. Simone's quiet confidence and mastery of the room left Julian Harper reconsidering conventional measures of authority, recognizing that the most profound influence often comes from those who are underestimated, overlooked, and assumed to be peripheral. The subtle recalibration of attention, power, and acknowledgement was evident in every carefully observed detail. The alignment of body language, the attentive glances exchanged among guests, and the unspoken admiration that had grown throughout the evening. Simone's presence demonstrated the enduring truth that respect and recognition are earned, not given, and that true authority can be established through skillful awareness, careful communication, and unwavering dignity. As the final courses were served and the last guests lingered in thoughtful conversation, the Veritas Lounge had become a stage where hierarchy was gently but irrevocably shifted, where influence had been exercised through subtle mastery rather than force, and where the quiet strength of one individual had illuminated the profound impact of poise, intelligence, and integrity on all who bore witness. Simone Davis, serene and composed, had not only navigated the evening with precision and grace, but had subtly rewritten the narrative of the night, leaving a lasting impression on Julian, the guests, and the ambience itself, proving that quiet competence and unwavering dignity are capable of reshaping even the most entrenched perceptions of power, authority, and respect in ways that are subtle, profound, and enduring.